In the early morning hours of April 30th, 2008, authorities in Kitsap County, Washington were contacted by residents in Port Orchard. There, along the 1100 block of Sidney Avenue, a fire had broken out, and just before 4 o'clock in the morning that Wednesday, the flames had become evident to sleeping neighbors nearby. The home belonged to a 47-year-old woman that was well liked by her neighbors, who had been working for various law offices over the past decade. Firefighters would show up a short time after the 911 call was made, and would sadly discover the body of the home's resident inside. She originally appeared to have been a victim of the fire, but her death was later labeled as suspicious by investigators. A lengthy examination of the crime scene would continue throughout the day, with members of the Port Orchard Police Department joined by numerous fire officials, and were assisted by the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab and the Seattle Fire Department. The former assisted with analyzing the crime scene, and the latter brought out dogs capable of sniffing out fire accelerants. Speaking to reporters with the Kitsap Sun, the local newspaper that covered the story early on, a neighbor that lived 2 doors down, named Don Rio, said that he was awakened by popping sounds that he likened to small caliber handgun sounds. Despite theorizing that these were gunshots, authorities would state that these noises were likely the windows of the woman's home being blown out by the heat. Regardless, when Rio and other neighbors looked out, they were surprised to see flames as high as 6 feet coming out of every window. He and another neighbor would run to the home, attempting to find or try and rouse the woman that lived inside, but they were unable to get inside more than a few feet. The flames were already burning too hot. A search of the home would later uncover the remains of the woman that lived there, and she was believed to have been alone at the time of her death, or so authorities believed. As investigators would learn more about the scene, they would discover that the fire had likely been started after the woman's death, started in order to cover up any wrongdoing on behalf of the offender, an unknown individual who had managed to flee without being noticed by anyone in the neighborhood. Nearly 15 years have passed, but those that knew the victim continue to ask, what happened to Linda Malcom? Linda Malcom had been born in Springfield, Illinois on January 21st, 1961. She was one of 9 children born to her parents, James and Donna Malcom, who had another 5 daughters and 3 sons. Linda would grow up with her family in the Midwest, but was understandably excited to move on and start a life of her own when she became an adult. In 1984, Linda joined the U.S. Navy and was shipped around North America as a result. She ended up spending some time in San Diego, California, as well as Hawaii, before ending up in Bremerton, Washington, an area that she enjoyed living in. There, she was stationed at Naval Base Kitsap, located just across the Puget Sound from Seattle. This is an area that is very scenic and quickly accessible to the Seattle-Tacoma area by either car or ferry. There, Linda began a life of her own, renting a small home in Port Orchard, where she would live for over 11 years, until her death in 2008. There, she lived alone and unmarried, but Linda made a lot of friends and was well liked by most of the people she encountered in her day-to-day. When she wasn't hanging around or entertaining friends, she could be seen fishing in Washington's many scenic areas, or visiting her local haunts, where she was a notorious karaoke fiend. Since leaving the Navy, Linda had become a legal assistant, working for numerous law offices in the local area. For a time, she worked at the Kitsap County Courthouse and spent time with numerous defense attorneys, where her job seemed to vary between legal assistant and paralegal. Robert Naon, a deputy prosecutor at the time, told reporters with the Kitsap Sun, she was always supportive and committed to her job. She was very efficient. Ron Ness, another defense attorney in Port Orchard that Linda worked for, described her as an excellent secretary. She had since gone on to work for another law firm in Belfair, but had recently quit that job and accepted another position at the Social Security Administration building in Bremerton. Despite having lived in her rented home in Port Orchard for over a decade, she had just made plans to move closer to her new job in Bremerton, a move that she clearly viewed as a new, fresh start for her life. The day before her death, In April of 2008, Linda had emailed her sisters, letting them know about her new job in Bremerton and how she was in the process of moving closer to it. Claiming to have gone through some tough times lately, she said that the black clouds had lifted and things were finally looking up. Sadly, the next day, April 30th, 2008, Linda's colorful life came to a tragic end. Surprisingly, Linda Malcom had not succumbed to the fire in her home. An investigation of Linda's body and the crime scene revealed that she had been stabbed to death beforehand, with fire officials noting multiple marks on her body in their initial reports. The autopsy, carried out by the Kitsap County Coroner's Office, would rule that Linda had died of multiple sharp force injuries, with the fire started afterward, likely meant to cover up the stabbing. Officials investigating the crime scene believed that the fire was started in the front of the home, where the living room and kitchen were located. Since the fire was noticed at 4 o'clock in the morning, the fire was likely started in the early morning hours, although the specific time hasn't been publicly disclosed by authorities. Despite investigators putting out the fire before it spread too far and being able to recover Linda's remains before they were significantly damaged, the investigation itself would stall pretty quick. For the next year or two, investigators claimed to be close to answers, reportedly circling around a person of interest that they believed has been involved in other criminal activity. Speaking to the Kitsap Sun, Port Orchard Police Chief Al Townsend would state, "While the person of interest has not been arrested in this case, we continue to monitor their activities and we are confident that this was not a random act of violence." This POI was reportedly a boyfriend or ex-boyfriend of Linda's, who was at least a handful of years older than her, and according to police, was not entirely forthcoming in information he provided to police about his and Linda's relationship. We only know this because in September of 2009, about a year and a half after Linda's death, this 57-year-old person of interest passed away due to natural causes, and his property in the Gig Harbor area was searched by police. It seems like this search was unable to turn up anything convincing, because police have not spoken about this lead in the years since. In fact, this story would fade away almost completely from the headlines for over a decade, until 2022, when a pair of cold case investigators began to look into it. That's after the break. Not too long ago, I was contacted by a pair of investigators looking to raise awareness in the story of Linda Malcom. Each has their own unique type of investigating. One is well-versed in the criminal justice and law enforcement field, the other a well-respected journalist and author, and together they've taken on the story of Linda Malcom. As you'll hear, both are well known for what they do, and they have actually had success together in reviving these old cold cases, which we touch upon during our conversation.
My name's Jen Buchholz, and I'm a professor of forensics and criminal justice at American Military University, and I head up our university's volunteer cold case team, where we take on unsolved homicides one case at a time. And I'm also an Army veteran, and I'm a criminal investigator for my local sheriff's department. So I have a kind of a varied background, but I think most of it's very applicable to what George and I and our team do on these unsolved murders.
My name is George Jared. I'm an investigative journalist and true crime author. I also do a podcast called Diamond State Murder Board, but it's not something that I primarily do. It's mostly just so I can give updates on cases that Jennifer and I are working on and some other cases that I have written about as a journalist. I've been a journalist for probably 18 years now, and I write about a lot of things. I write about business, politics, government, and I do stories with entertainers, stuff like that. But I kind of, the true crime world just kind of drew me in, especially a lot of these unsolved murder cases that I would write about, because it's when you deal with these families and you deal with the horror of what other human beings do to each other, it just tugs at your heartstrings. And the ironic thing is that after you do it for a while, like you get to be pretty, when you're an investigative journalist, it's like being an investigator for a police department. After a while, you figure things out just like they do. And so kind of what happened in this, how Jennifer and I met. So the Rebecca Gould murder case out of Melbourne, Arkansas, she was murdered on September 20th, 2004. And it was an unsolved murder case for years. It was the first case I ever covered as a journalist. And I was actually out there when they found her body. And so I dealt with her family for years. I dealt with the police. I thought the case was really solvable. Well, in 2018, a woman named Catherine Townsend approached me because she wanted to do a podcast called Hell and Gone. And so I agreed to do it because she wanted to do like an 8 or 10 part series podcast on Rebecca's case. And so I did the interviews, and then the podcast came out. It was very popular in 2018 when it came out. It was one of the most popular true crime podcasts that year. And Jennifer and I didn't know each other. We had no connection whatsoever. She lives in Colorado Springs. I live in Northeast Arkansas, just about an hour outside of Memphis, which, by the way, I grew up in Oregon, Mike. So I'm an Oregonian.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So
another Pacific Northwest guy.
Yeah. So I a bunch of my family is still up there, just so you know. So anyway, I did the podcast. Well, Jennifer, at the behest of one of her bosses at AMU, they were talking about podcasts, and she suggested the Hell and Gone podcast to Jennifer. And Jennifer became very intrigued with Rebecca's case and the behavioral aspects of it, because I'm sure Jennifer's told you one of the things that she's very good at, and what part of it that interests her greatly in these murder cases is the behavioral aspects. The behavior of the killer, why they do the things they do. It helps answer those questions. So she listened to the podcast and reached out to some people in the podcast and didn't have a lot of luck getting a hold of anybody right off the bat. Well, then she sent me an email, and I've said this 1,000 times. I was sitting on my couch. I get this email from her, and I looked at as soon as I got it, I turned to my wife and I said, somebody very serious just emailed me, because I get a lot of emails from people all over the country, in connection with some of these cases. And she asked in this email, she asked if maybe we could speak for a few minutes. Well, our first phone conversation lasted 3 hours and 21 minutes, Jen?
3 hours and 22 minutes.
22 minutes, yeah. And to her just credit, a month later, her and her husband were in Arkansas studying this case in the middle of February. And they had never been to Arkansas. They had no connection to this state. I think she's probably been here, probably going on half a dozen times now.
Yeah, like three or four or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the end of October, when you were here for 4 or 5 days, and then you left to go to West Virginia to work on a case, and then you came back. I don't know if you count that as one trip or two, but she was at my house for the better part of 2 weeks. And so, and again, this is, we are self-funded. Nobody pays us to do any of this stuff. We have a skill set, each of us and other people on our team, and we just try to use those skills. Like we have an arson expert, who's a real good friend of mine. He's been really helpful in some of these cases we've been working on. We have a knife expert. We've got a social worker who has been incredible. I mean, she always comes up with great stuff in cases that we're working on. We work with podcasters. So we've got a, I don't know if we want to use the term, we have an eclectic group of people that we work with. And one thing that they always bring is like a different perspective that maybe me as a journalist I wouldn't think of, or maybe Jennifer as a criminology professor. And also Jennifer failed to mention that she also worked in the medical examiner's office in New York City for a few years. So she has a lot of background so she has a lot of background in just, dealing with human bodies, who've died and died in different ways. So she always has a real keen mind when it comes to, when she's looking at an autopsy, like, and I'll give you an example. There was a belief in Rebecca Gould's murder case. Oh, and by the way, that case has a connection to the Northwest too, because William Miller, I'm sure Jennifer told you, was arrested in Cottage Grove, Oregon.
Oh, we didn't get that far, but yes, he was.
Yeah.
He was in Cottage Grove, and his mom and brother, who almost certainly were involved in some degree or at least knew about Rebecca's murder, they still live in Oregon. And funny enough, I tell people this all the time. It was my first murder case, Mike, and the guy got arrested. He confessed to her murder on my birthday.
Oh, wow.
And happy birthday to George.
I know, right? And it was so ironic because he lived in the Philippines, and at every state, any place in the world he could have been caught, he was caught about an hour from where I grew up. I grew up near Salem. So
okay. Wow, that's actually like a small world, because the first story that got me started podcasting was the Golden State Killer, and he was caught on my birthday back in 2018 or whatever that was.
Oh, no way. That's awesome.
So, yeah, small world.
Oh, yeah. Hey, Paul, Paul Holes, the detective who caught the Golden State Killer. We've talked to him several times at Crime. He was at CrimeCon last year. I went to CrimeCon in Vegas to speak about the West Memphis 3 case. Yeah, I did more news stories about that case than anybody in the world. And then I wrote a book about it. And Damien Echols' attorneys last Sunday called me because they were going to file that appeal with the Arkansas Supreme Court. And so I'm real plugged into that case. And ironically enough, Damien Echols spent several months in Oregon before he came back to West Memphis right before those murders happened.
Wow. Yeah, this is a small world. And you guys have like the Avengers of like criminal investigators going on. This is really neat.
Yeah, we have a really awesome team of people, like George said, with different backgrounds and skill sets. But we found that is so incredibly valuable, because even though me and George have a lot of experience and training and whatnot, like, we can't come up with everything. And I'm not an arson expert, we're not knife experts. So we need people like that to help us on some of these cases. And I mean, the amount of insight that we get from them is just incredible, but it also provides you so many clues about the crime and the killer themselves.
Yeah. And like, we had a case, Mike, out of Lubbock, Texas. It was profiled on the confession killer, Deborah Sue Williamson. And it's an unsolved murder. It's still unsolved to this day. And actually our collaborative book that we wrote together is about that case and our work on it. And we brought in a knife expert, and it was so stunning, Jennifer, how quickly he looked at the autopsy photos and he immediately identified the type of knife.
Yes.
And our wheels were spinning when it came to that aspect of it, because we couldn't figure out what knife it was. He immediately knew what it was. It was a military style dagger that was issued in the Army from 1943 to 1946. The Army made several million of these knives. He said, and he didn't know anything about the case at the time. He's giving us the analysis of just what he's seeing in this young woman's body, what happened to it. And he said, he goes, okay, it's a military style dagger, I'm almost certain, from 1943 to 1946. And it was primarily issued to people who fought at the invasion of Normandy. And 2 of the people of interest that we had, their fathers fought at Normandy, and he had no clue about that.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
That was eye-opening.
Yeah, we were blown away.
Yeah, who knew how much knowledge you could get from looking at a stab wound, But now I get it. So that's and we, everything, all the analysis that we do or that we get from people like that, we send it to the investigating authority on each case. We're not like trying to be in some competition with the, whatever law enforcement agency is over each case. We share everything with them because we know it will help them, draw comparisons or conclusions or whatever. They can use it to compare to whatever information they have in their case file and stuff. So that's another aspect of our methodology, is like, we're here to help that, that detective, that investigator, whoever it is that oversees each case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in addition to the cases you guys have covered, we've seen that recently with the Delphi murders that, they just brought in, a new investigator, and they looked at the old leads and they found some report that had been buried from the early days. And it's like, sometimes it just takes, that new perspective or a new set of eyes to,
exactly
connect the dots.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, Kelsey German, Libby German's sister, actually, she came onto my podcast last year and did a 2-part series with me on the Delphi murders.
Wow.
Hmm.
Wow. That's really impressive.
Yeah.
You guys have done a lot of really great work. That's,
We
you guys,
try.
yeah, you guys should feel proud of the work you've done. That's awesome.
No, we put a lot of effort into each case that we tackle. We're very proud of our efforts. It doesn't always end up in an arrest, but we know that, we only work one case at a time, and we work it to the full extent and until we literally can go no further. And so obviously we're going to talk about the case of Linda Malcom today, but that's what we're doing on her case now. That's George's and my focus, our only focus.
Mm. Well, do you guys want to talk briefly about how you came to learn about Linda's story?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So this past summer of 2022, George and I were sort of in limbo because in the Rebecca case, an arrest had been made, but it hadn't gone to trial yet. In the Debbie Williamson case, they were waiting on DNA testing. So we didn't really have an active role in either case anymore. So we decided to put out a request for case submissions through the university. And we got dozens through the summer, mostly from family members of victims, some from friends, some from people who never knew the victim, but they're just like, this case happened in my hometown. No one's ever looked into it, whatever. And we evaluated each and every case and did research on all of them and narrowed them down to, I don't know what, George, maybe 5 or 6 that we thought we could be most beneficial to. Unfortunately, there's some cases that there's just not much that we can do or bring to the table. Like there was one case submitted where it was a hit and run where the person died on a freeway. And it's like, well, I can't do much in that case. Unfortunately, it's so tragic. So we kind of have some loose criteria when looking for a case to work on. And one is that, at least from my aspect, because behavioral analysis is my thing, I always kind of latch on to cases where the killer went above and beyond and took extra steps that they didn't need to, because that provides us a lot of clues about the relationship to the victim, maybe the motive, their personality, and stuff like that. And so Linda's case definitely fit that criteria because she was stabbed approximately 18 times, way more times than she needed to be in order to kill her. And then her house was set on fire. So someone took an immense amount of extra risk to take her life and then try to cover it up. And so that really stood out to me. And George and I also liked, it really hadn't been covered. Like we were talking before you started recording, there's very, very little media coverage on her case. And I think that is beneficial to us because we can kind of start fresh with it, and we're not, I don't like the word competing, but we're not competing with somebody else who's covered it or investigated it. We start with fresh eyes and unbiased. And so those were a couple of things that stood out to us. It was actually Linda's nephew, who's a student at AMU, that submitted her case for our consideration. And so once we decided we were interested in it, he was the person that we made contact with and talked to first. And he's a great guy. And coincidentally lives 20 minutes from me. So,
wow.
Yeah, like of all the places. So that's how we first started, or gained our knowledge on Linda's case and then started down this path.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for sharing. That's really interesting. I'm really intrigued by I guess the specifics of the crime, because like you said, she was stabbed 18 times and her house was set on fire. And both of those, to me, I'm not like a trained law enforcement expert, but both would seem to indicate that this crime was incredibly personal. And then the fire would seem to indicate that this was someone that wanted to cover up their involvement. But that's just where my mind goes immediately.
Nope, and I think that's the most logical deduction to make in this case, and the reason for that fire. She lived in Port Orchard, Washington, and she lived in a regular neighborhood, so she had neighbors basically right next door. So it's not like the killer thought, "Oh, well, I'll just completely burn this house to the ground, and and there will be nothing left of it." They had to logically know that a neighbor was going to hear or see this fire and call 911, and that's exactly what happened. So there's got to be some other reason. And I think your initial thought process is probably spot on, that the killer themselves may have gotten injured, or they at least knew that their prints or DNA or something was in that house. And so they thought this was the easiest way to cover up that evidence.
Mhm.
I don't know. What was George, what was your initial thought on the fire?
My initial thought was that they were trying to cover up evidence. And of course, coming off the Deborah Sue Williamson case that we worked together, which was also a stabbing where the woman was stabbed around 17 times. One thing that Jennifer and I've talked a lot about, when it comes to a stabbing crime, when you're stabbing someone, the handle on the knife gets bloody very quickly, and it gets slippery, and it is very common for the killer to cut themselves or injure themselves in the commission of killing them. So it's possible, in my mind, I was sitting there thinking, okay, maybe the killer had cut themselves, and so they were dripping blood everywhere. And so one of the reasons you need to start the fire is because, hey, there's no way to go around and clean up all these droplets of blood potentially. So fire is easy. You set the fire, the fingerprints go away, the DNA goes away, and obviously all the blood and everything else. So that was kind of my thought, is that this was just to cover up
Mhm.
that type of stuff.
Yeah, and I'm not super familiar with Port Orchard, but I am familiar with Bremerton, which is right next to it. And I know that
Yes.
a lot of the houses there are they're like old school military housing. So they're like really small houses that, like Jen was saying, like they're really close together. So I'm not sure if her neighborhood was the same way, but a fire like that would be probably easily discovered or seen by
Yes.
neighbors or something.
I think there was maybe a slight delay in it being reported because it was set in the middle of the night. So the 911 call came in at 3:58 in the morning, and it
Mhm.
took the sound of probably either one of the windows of the house blowing out or one of her car tires exploding that woke up the next door neighbor, and she looked out the window and saw the house engulfed and called 911. Obviously, if this had been set in the middle of the day, someone might have noticed it a couple minutes earlier, but it actually was reported fairly quickly, which was an advantage because the structure of the house was completely intact, and actually the roof was untouched. It wasn't burnt at all. It was just the inside that was pretty charred. So, and once the fire was put out and investigators entered the scene, they found Linda's body on the floor in her bedroom. But thankfully, again, because of the quick reaction or quick response, her body was fairly intact. I mean, part of it was charred. I wouldn't call her recognizable, but her body was completely intact, and they were able to do a full autopsy and full toxicology on her, which was, obviously huge for the investigation.
Yeah, and I don't really know much about, like her personal story, but it sounds like she didn't have like any family or anyone that was living in the area. It seemed like she was living by herself and,
Mm-hmm.
all of her
Yeah.
family, I think, lived in Illinois in the Midwest. Is that right?
Yes. She had a pretty extensive family, but none of them lived in Port Orchard. She was a Navy veteran. She had served in the Navy for several years. And that area, there's a lot of veterans that live in that area. And so she had moved there after she was done serving in the Navy. And she had been working as a paralegal. She was, like you said, she was single, no children. She lived a pretty carefree lifestyle doing what she wanted to do. From what we've been able to gather so far, Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
And he was getting ready to move when this murder happened. The murder happened on or about April 30th, 2008. And we're still going back and forth on the timing of everything, just because it's hard to pinpoint an exact time, but Jennifer, I think we're getting closer to pinpointing exactly when we think the window of death was for Linda. But anyway, she didn't have family there, but she did have a lot of friends. Jen, I would think she was probably kind of a well-known character in some circles of Port Orchard for sure. She wasn't a recluse by any stretch of the imagination. She had a favorite bar that she loved to go to, and she liked to sing karaoke, and she kind of had, what some might say was kind of a promiscuous lifestyle. She dated a lot of people, and, she did what she wanted to do, which is totally fine.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that at all. Yeah, so I actually went to Port Orchard a couple months ago to do some on the ground stuff, and she loved this bar near her house called the Golden Grill on the Bay. It's actually a Chinese restaurant, but they have a section of it it's got a big like horseshoe bar. I went in there every day. It was a gold mine. Every day that I went in there, I met new people that knew Linda. So it was very clear that she frequented that place a lot, and that she had an effect on people, because still, almost 15 years later, all these people that I met, they all remembered stories of her. I didn't hear a bad word about her. I mean, she was obviously very personable, outgoing, friendly, fun. Yeah, she liked to party, but everybody, it was just great connecting with some of these people that she used to hang out with. So she, like George said, she was pretty well known in the community.
Mhm. Yeah. When you spoke to some of her friends, like what were the kind of stories that they would tell about her? Like I'm just interested just to learn more about her as a person.
A lot of, like George already mentioned, they said, "Oh my gosh, she loved to sing karaoke," and it was haunting in a way, because at that bar they have a little stage and they'll have karaoke to this day. I think at least one night a week, and we have a photo of Linda on that stage singing karaoke, and it was just a little weird to be there in that space, knowing that she had been in the exact same space at one time. But
Mhm.
yeah, so she loved to sing. It seemed like Halloween was one of her things. There are a couple people that told me about Halloween parties, and recalled her costumes that she wore a couple years for Halloween, and just crazy things she did. And um, loved working, as a paralegal. That was her thing. She had done it in the Navy, and she continued in that field after she got out of the service. So she seemed to really enjoy that. Um, I don't know. I think socializing, honestly, was one of her big hobbies.
So you've mentioned a couple times that she was a paralegal. Would you mind talking about like what kind of work she did if you're able to?
Um,
Let's
I mean, I guess it would just be anything to whatever work she would do as a paralegal in a law office. I mean, it was probably pretty varied. Most lawyers, they specialize in certain types of law, but most of my lawyer friends, they end up doing a lot of different things. So I don't know, Jen, is there anything more specific? That I can't think of anything right off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't know specifically, but she worked for I believe it was the county, is it the district attorney or the defense?
Yes.
Yeah, she worked in a government capacity for quite a while. That was probably her longest job that she had in that location. But in terms of the specifics of her day-to-day job, I don't have that yet. I think it's just, the typical paralegal duties and whatever they're asked to do by the lawyers that they work for.
Yeah, I was just curious because I know that a lot of times whenever a lawyer, something happens to them, the first theory on like web sleuths is that they were, prosecuting a criminal case and
Sure.
clearly it was drug dealers that went after them or something. So I was just
I mean,
curious if you guys have encountered any theories or anything like that.
we can't discount that her murder's not or possibly related to, some case that she helped work on, but she wasn't a lawyer herself. She wasn't the one making the decisions or actually charging
Mhm.
someone and having them arrested and then taking them to trial. So although I can't dismiss that theory at this time, I think it's less probable than some others. But there are a couple of her friends that did bring it up and mentioned that there was a specific case that she may have worked where a member of law enforcement ended up being charged and arrested and convicted of, I don't know what the crime is, but of some crime and then imprisoned. And so there's been speculation that maybe that person, when they got out of prison, went after her. But again, it's like she just played one part in that whole process. She's not the one arresting someone or, taking them to trial. So again, can't discount it. It's something that we need to look into and figure out the specifics of that case. And that's something that we're working on currently. Um, but aside from that, nothing else. Most people think it was either like a jilted lover, maybe an ex-boyfriend, but definitely personal. There's not one person yet who has said, "Oh yeah, I think it could have been a stranger," and we don't believe that either.
Yeah, there's almost no question that whoever did this was known to her in some capacity. They may not have known each other well, but we'll say this, they were well known enough to her that they could have been in an intimate setting together. Let me put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know that there was an article I found from 2009 where they said that police had a suspect, but they weren't willing to name them. I don't know if there's been any, repeat mentions of that in the years since, but is that something you guys have encountered that police have like a person of interest or something?
Police are, although they're collaborating with us and they're most definitely accepting of anything we send them, and they've, talked with us about a few things. We don't have their case file, which is fine at this point. We kind of like to do things with fresh eyes on our own to begin with. But there is definite talk. We know that they looked into one of Linda's ex-boyfriends named Keith. That is a definite. Many people that I talked to brought up his name, although most of the people I met that knew Linda also had met Keith and didn't feel like he was the type to perpetrate this type of murder. But, you can't discount anybody. Unfortunately, Keith passed away the year after Linda, so he is no longer alive, and so we're obviously unable to talk to him. But I know that police investigated him pretty heavily in the beginning, so hopefully eventually we'll be privy to some of that information on him. That's the main person that people have brought up that they said was a suspect, and I think that's probably the person that's being referred to in that article, but I can't say 100%.
Yeah, just curious, because I'm always intrigued when you read stuff or find stuff from early on in the case, and then it just kind of disappears.
Yes.
There's always kind of like the nagging thought about like if it was dropped by police or if they're just not talking about it or anything. So I was just interested.
Well, and Mike, and the unfortunate thing that we've encountered, and we've encountered this actually more than once now in other cases we've worked. There's a lot of times there's a key or crucial detail early on in the investigation that either gets ignored or gets caught up in the wash, and it could dramatically change the trajectory of a case. And so a lot of times, a lot of these cold cases get solved because they go back and look at the original investigation, and some detail from the first, hours, days, or weeks that was ignored or missed by one detective gets picked up by another detective. I mean, that happened in the Rebecca Gould case that we worked together. The guy who ended up confessing to the murder, he was interviewed within days of her vanishing. And if they had just locked in on him from the beginning, that case probably would have been solved maybe even before her body was even found.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. So I also am of the belief that, if police go after a particular person for so long, but they're unable to connect them to the crime, then that's probably not the right person. And that's exactly what happened in Rebecca's case too. The one detective who was on it for 14, 15 years, George, he was convinced a local drug dealer killed her, but he could never link him to the crime. And it's like, well, yeah, because he had nothing to do with it. After 14 years, let's broaden our horizons and start looking at other people. And I'm not saying that is what happened in Linda's case, but I guess my point is that they looked heavily at her ex-boyfriend as a suspect and never apparently found anything to link him to the crime. So that's another reason I tend to not think it was him. But again, we're not, ruling anything out at this point.
Gotcha. Well, is there anything that you guys have found in your digging that, other than the stuff that we've talked about, has, perked your ears up or made you want to keep following up on that?
Well, I'll put out one tidbit that I think is just interesting, and we're not sure exactly what to make of it yet. But looking at Linda's bank records, the last debit from her checking account was on April 29th, which was a Tuesday, in the afternoon, about 2:15 in the afternoon at a Safeway grocery store. And it was for a $116 purchase and some change. And to me, I'm like, you're moving in 2 days. What are you buying? Why are you buying $100+ worth of groceries? Back then, that's quite a bit. And why would you buy that many groceries only to have to move them? Or was she buying something that's really expensive, like caviar? So there is a story, one of her sisters seeing crab legs in a trash bag in the yard after the fire was put out and everything. So we have wondered, did she make a purchase of crab legs, which are expensive, but then that's not usually something that you eat by yourself. So I'm just putting this out there because, number one, if someone listening hears this, it might jog a memory of them seeing Linda at Safeway that afternoon, and we would love to hear from anybody who did. Or it might jog a memory of someone who checked her out and maybe could remember what she bought. I know it's a long shot, but it's worth at least mentioning. But that has piqued our curiosity as to what and why, she was purchasing at the store 2 days before moving.
Yeah, and 2008, that was at least a few years before Washington amended their liquor laws. because they didn't sell liquor in the grocery stores until like 2003 or 2013, I think.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking like, like $113, like, oh, maybe it was like,
Mhm.
a $50 bottle of vodka, but I don't think you could buy liquor at the grocery stores until 2013, 2014, something like that.
See, that's
Interesting.
actually really good to know because I did not know that.
Yeah, up until about a decade ago, they had the state-run liquor stores. This was before I could drink, but I just remember my parents having to go there and like figure out like, oh, we want to go get some
Mhm.
beer. We got to go between the hours of 9 and 6 or whenever they were open. So
Interesting. That's actually really helpful. So we know that she most likely had to buy food of some sort.
yeah.
Um, I don't know what else, George. I mean, that also, by the way, that's sort of the last proof of life we have so far. So about,
Mhm.
say 2:30 on that Tuesday afternoon till 3:58 in the morning when the neighbor calls 911, we actually have about a 12 or 13-hour window of death. Although, like George said, there's a couple other details or a couple other items that we're chasing down that are going to help narrow that window, but that's not something that we're going to put out just yet.
Yeah, I saw in one of the articles you guys had, or I don't know if it was you guys or her nephew had mentioned she had been talking to people online. I don't know if that's something you guys want to talk
Mhm.
about.
Address that.
Yeah, I mean, she had been talking to people online, for sure. She, like I said before, she kind of led a promiscuous lifestyle. She was known to date men and women. And, it's also possible, that she may have been engaged in some activities, like sexual activities where she might have been making some money online, doing some of that stuff. And again, we're not here to judge what she was doing in any way, shape, or form, but
Mhm.
these are critical details that we need to know because they might provide avenues towards, there might be somebody that she was engaged in some of these activities with who, could very well be our perpetrator. So we have to put it out there. And her family is well aware. In fact, Jen, I mean, her family is the one that
Oh,
they
yeah.
they keep telling us about all that stuff.
Oh,
So
yes. Yeah, they were very upfront, which we appreciated.
yeah.
I know it's hard sometimes for family members of victims to hear their lifestyle be dissected, but it's unfortunately something we have to do with every victim because, I mean, victimology is so critical in order, to learn who the person associated with and, what their daily habits were and stuff like that. So, yeah, it sounds like she was engaged in some, internet dating of some sort. And we have no idea yet, how many people she might have gone on a date with that she met online. It could be 1, it could be 20. That's something else that we're trying to work on.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was just like you guys were saying that like you don't want to like you know make anyone feel bad for certain activities they're doing or anything, but
No.
yeah, that stuff is like actually really integral. I know that I've covered stories where it's unsolved stuff, so I just try and highlight what they were doing beforehand. And it's like if they were involved in drug use or like sex work or something like that, like no
Yeah.
judgment, but it's
No.
obviously important to what happened in the final hours of their life. So it's
Absolutely.
best to bring
Yeah.
awareness to it.
Yeah, it's critical, and I don't care what your lifestyle is, no one deserves to be stabbed 18 times
Mhm.
and lit on fire. So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, definitely. Would you guys be able to talk about your relationship with Linda's nephew and kind of like how you started talking to him and
He didn't know her real well. Um, we met Mike through his submission of the case, and he gave his contact information when he submitted it, so that's how we got a hold of him. And, I've actually met him in person because he lives so close to me. He had this big, like, file folder thing that his mom had sent to him or sent him when he was visiting, excuse me, last summer. He took this file folder from his mom and brought it home with him so that I could take it and digitize everything in it, for 2 reasons. 1, she didn't have a digital copy of all this paperwork, and I was scared something could happen to it, and I wanted to make sure it
Mhm.
was preserved. And then obviously for our own use, we needed copies of everything that she had, related to Linda. So I met Mike through, that way, through retrieving that binder and then taking it back to him. And he's a great guy. He's also a military veteran and he works in Department of Corrections here in Colorado. So we have a lot of similarities in our backgrounds. But he knew Linda, but he didn't know her real well, So he had some insight, but he was the one that put us in touch with his mother, Cindy, which is Linda's sister, one of her sisters. And then I think Cindy and Linda, they were probably the closest. And Cindy was also Linda's executor when she died. So Cindy handled all of the post death business that unfortunately somebody has to deal with. So she gave us a great deal of insight too. And then we've also met through Zoom some of her other siblings too. So they've all been really gracious and helpful.
That's awesome. Like I'm always just in awe of family members of victims that are able to persevere and keep fighting for their loved ones. It's just, I've spoken to so many of them while making this podcast, and it's just every time it almost like it brings me to tears, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It's so inspiring because if they can keep going, like obviously if I have a bad day, I could keep going. It's just, it's like going through such a profound loss. Like, yeah,
Well,
sorry, I'm
and
just in awe.
no, and we know it's so difficult for them because we basically have to re-traumatize them through this process, and we hate that.
Mhm.
But it goes with the territory of trying to solve a crime. It's like we need to extract every memory, every detail they can think of about their loved one. And of course, it just opens all those old wounds. And so that was also something that we discussed right up front with them. Like, think this through for a while. It's going to be painful. Are you willing to go through that pain again? And we understand if you're not. We're not forcing ourselves on you. But they did. They had like a big family meeting and they were on board. So they've been
Jen,
really.
and Jen, it's even deeper than that because, a lot of family members, they know some details of what happened to their loved one. But when we do this deep dive back into it, we always uncover things that potentially make the pain even worse because, they think they know what happened to their loved one, but we really, we try to figure out exactly what happened. I mean, and Jennifer is very, in the Rebecca Gould case, I'll use that as an example again. There was a perception out there that Rebecca had been hit a single time in the head with a piano leg. And Jennifer looked at the autopsy and said, she had some other people that some other experts look at it. And she and them came to the conclusion that Rebecca had been struck twice. And that was not widely known. And, when you're going through that process of figuring that part out, we're in communication with the victim's dad, almost on a daily basis. So we're having to tell him, hey, your daughter got smashed in the head more than you thought. And then later on, we were able to figure out, or we think we figured out, that she had been strangled, which was not in the sphere, in the public sphere. And the problem with that is that, obviously, well, Mike, you're a parent. So, imagine your child. Okay, first you thought she was just hit one time on the head and then unfortunately dumped on the side of the road and that's how she died. Now you know that she's been hit in the head multiple times. And then that wasn't enough. They had to actually strangle her to end her life. And so,
just, I can't even imagine having to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, that did happen in Linda's case because we helped the
Mhm.
family get the autopsy report, which they'd never had before.
Mhm.
And, we obviously warned them ahead of time. I'm like, you deserve to have this. I know you want it. Just prepare yourself mentally. And it was tough because they had been told that Linda was only stabbed 3 or 4 times. And then they found out it was more like 18.
Wow.
And that was really difficult for some of her siblings, obviously. I mean, and I think whoever told them that lie in the beginning just did a big disservice to the family. Ultimately, it just caused more pain and trauma later on. But it is what it is. We can't
It just
change
kind of means
that.
they have to go through the
Yep.
loss, the feeling of loss twice, and it's just
Exactly.
rug pulled out from under you.
Yeah, I'm learning the actual truth of what happened to their loved one. So, but it's part of it. And as painful as I know the process was for Rebecca's dad, I know that he's very thankful that at least finally this monster is behind bars. And so it is worth it in the end. But it's difficult, and we totally recognize that.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that it's, amazing people like you doing it, and, some of the other people that I've met in the true crime, especially the podcast industry, like, I'm really glad it's not them that are out there trying to solve cases.
Yeah. No, we don't just cover them. We dive right in. And as you now know, we always go to the scene. We always go to the local area before we announce our involvement in a case. We always make the connections with the investigating authority and explain our process. We meet with them in person, set up, share drives. And it's I don't know. I don't know what else to say. We're out there actually going through the motions and taking the steps that need to be taken in order to try to identify a killer and get him off the streets. And it's hard. And there's days where we cry, we throw our hands up, I want to punch the wall. But, most days it's like, okay, we did something, like we got a step forward. We found out something new. We made a new connection. And you got to be patient and take it one day at a time.
And Mike, I'll add to that. Like in the Deborah Sue Williamson case, this unsolved 1975 stabbing murder in Lubbock, Texas, that we worked on, we went there twice and we tracked down every single person, for the most part, that was interviewed originally by the police that was still alive. And we created a case file. Jen, I'm going to be conservative. I would say it was probably 5 times larger than the original case file that they had, the police. And we turned that entire case file over to them. And, they would interview, like a person of interest, back in the day. And, we would get the report we had because we had the case file in that case. And, there might be 2 paragraphs, well, then we would track down that same witness or person of interest. And Jen, we would talk to them for hours. We would interview and we would explore every aspect that we possibly could with them. And so that's kind of the approach that's the approach we're going to take in Linda's case. And Jennifer's already been on the ground once. I had a scheduling conflict back when she went in November, so I couldn't do it. But we're going to go back, I think in April, anniversary of her murder. And, we're going to go through that same process again. And we're going to create a case file that we hope will be very beneficial to the Port Orchard Police Department in solving this murder.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Yeah, it sounds like you guys are doing some amazing work. This is just talking with you guys for the past hour has been inspiring for myself because I want to do more of this stuff now.
Well, we appreciate that. Hey, we're always looking for help. So
yeah, we're begging. We'll beg for help.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, anytime I can help, just please let me know.
Yeah.
This stuff is always, I hate to say it's interesting because, you're dealing with someone's very personal loss, but just trying to help out and, I even just spread awareness in this case, because I know that's what you guys are doing now. I think it's always helpful.
It's huge because you'll get people that come out of the woodwork that have never talked to police, but might have critical information. And, that's something we always emphasize to the investigating authorities. Not everybody's comfortable going to law enforcement or talking to a police officer or somebody with a badge and a gun. But George and I have had great success of getting some of those people to talk to us. And then we can just relay the information to the police. And we don't even have to give them the person's identity. If someone wants to stay confidential, that's fine. We'll just take your info and pass it to police so they can do what they need to do with it. And we've had, like I said, a lot of success in the past with that. So that's one big reason that we, want to partner with police, because they're actually more restricted than we are, right? Like I don't have to read somebody their Miranda rights if I want to talk to them or if I want to record them on the phone or whatever. So, but police do.
We want to, and we've had no compunction at all about in one case, there was a guy that, I'll say he was a suspect, and I walked right into his work and tried to talk to him, and he took off. As soon as he saw me, he was gone. We can do whatever we want. We're not handcuffed by all those same things. And I will add this: in one case, a stay-at-home mom provided us with critical details. And she contacted us out of the freaking blue. We had no idea she existed. We knew nothing about her. And she's a part of our team now.
Yeah. She's like our ancestry expert. She's self-taught, but she can build out a family tree in no time. And I keep telling her, you need to go get certified in the genetic genealogy and go work in that field, because she is fantastic.
She's insane. She will be messaging us and I have to message her back. And I'm just like, I don't know what you're talking about. What does all this mean? And she's like, have you not been paying attention? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, apparently I haven't been. So just explain it to me like I'm one of your kids.
Yeah.
Wow,
But
that's awesome.
it just illustrates that it doesn't matter what your background is. Everybody has something to offer. We feel, and we are so open to taking help from anybody. We don't care what your background is or whatever. Like in Linda's case, this girl reached out and she goes, "Hey, I'm really good with this 3D diagram program. Can I put together a diagram of or the layout of Linda's home?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, yes, please," because I suck at drawing and I don't have a 3D program to use. And so she did it in like a day, and posted it to the
Wow.
group. And it's stuff like that that can be so incredibly helpful and that me and George just don't have the means to do. So we welcome anybody, join our Facebook groups and our social media, and please chime in and follow along and brainstorm with us.
Yeah, so I know the Facebook group. I think it's called Unsolved Murder of Linda Malcom.
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'll make sure to include a link in the whenever this episode comes out, I'll include a link in the show notes and stuff.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. And listeners can obviously share their group with friends of theirs, and you don't have to live in the local area, or obviously you don't have to have known the victim to help us. And we welcome anybody to join. That's our main social media platform we use because it's the best for discussion and interaction. You can follow my podcast, Break the Case, on Twitter, which is the handle is Break the Case AMU. And season 3, which is starting soon, is going to exclusively cover Linda's case. So I literally was recording another interview before this for this season of the podcast on Linda's case. So for those that like podcasts, that'll be another one to listen to, and you'll get some really in-depth coverage of her case. So, and if you listen and something sparks an idea or jogs a memory or whatever, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or George. We answer all of our messages. So, and don't ever think an idea is stupid or anything, because you just never know.
Yeah, I always try and emphasize at the end of my episodes, like if you know anything, like even if you think it doesn't matter, like because like you guys were mentioning earlier, like you're looking for information about what you bought at Safeway the day before. Any little detail like that can always come in handy.
Yeah.
So,
and something that your podcast might help with, we're hoping to reach listeners who served with Linda in the Navy, because we've been very successful in finding tons of people in Port Orchard who knew her. We have not been very successful yet in finding people who were stationed with her and served with her. So if you're listening to this and you knew her in the military, please hit us up, send us a message. We'd love to chat with you. Even if you think you know nothing, any kind of insight on the victim can be helpful. Those are the main things. Like George said, the 15-year anniversary of her murder is coming up at the end of April. So we do plan to be in town, and we will probably have some sort of function, meet and greet, maybe even do a presentation or something for people that would like to meet up with us in person. We love meeting people from, that are interacting with us on social media or who knew the victim or anybody in the local area. It's very helpful to us. So follow our Facebook group for information on that. The police chief actually said they were planning to do something for the anniversary. I'm not entirely sure what that is, but as we get more information, we'll be sure to put it out. And then, like I said, Break the Case will be covering her case in great detail, and we encourage everybody to listen and engage with us. So there's a killer out there, a vicious killer that needs to be taken off the streets. So help us find him.
Yeah, definitely. What about you, George? Is there anything else you want to kind of close on?
I guess probably the only thing I'll say, and this is to her killer, is that, we're going to figure out who you are and we're going to expose you. So get ready for that. And we have no fear in doing that. And so just get ready, because we're coming for you.
I might have already talked to you.
May have.
And you think we don't know.
Yeah, that's so funny when they think we don't know when we actually know.
Yeah. But yeah, so just again, thank you for covering her case on this episode and just helping us raise awareness. And I think all of us together that we can do great things. Oh, I'll put a shout out too. We're planning to go to CrimeCon. We hope to present at CrimeCon. We haven't talked to the producers yet, but we plan to be at CrimeCon at least. So if anybody listening is attending, again, shoot us a message so we can be sure to, just say hi, shake your hand or whatever, and meet you in person. And that's happening in September in Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
And then, George, what's our other speaking engagement in Arkansas?
Oh yeah, we're going to be at the Northwest Arkansas True Crime Festival in May, and we're going to give a. I don't think we've even discussed what presentation we're going to give there, but we're gonna present at that festival, and I think that's it for now. We've got other stuff going on, but that's all.
Yeah, we're working on some other stuff, but those are our two big upcoming events. So come say hi.
The story of Linda Malcom remains open and unsolved. Anyone with information is encouraged to reach out to the Port Orchard Police Department, but you may also choose to reach out to Jen and George at their Facebook group, The Unsolved Murder of Linda Malcom. I'll include a link to the group in the show notes, and I would encourage anyone with an interest in this case, or anyone who knows anything, who thinks they may know anything, to follow along with the group and reach out to Jen and George or law enforcement. Until such a time, the story of Linda Malcom will remain unresolved.